Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Saturday, May 18th, and this is my weekly wrap-up. So first, I've done a new series of poetry shorts this week in which I read a single poem each day. And they've been a lot of fun, and I have loved hearing from everyone who has been watching and leaving me lovely comments. Next, in an effort to continue to support Horror Mayhem and all of my friends who are hosting this event, I devoted another Poetry Thursday episode to some darker poetry. This week, I read some of the poetry of H.P. Lovecraft. Although he is most famous for his horror prose, mostly short stories, he also wrote an abundance of poetry, influenced both by Lord Byron and by Edgar Allan Poe. Indeed, he considered himself more of a poet than a writer of prose. So that was fun to explore his poetry. Next, my real life book group is currently reading Zadie Smith's newest novel, The Fraud. I'm just about a quarter of the way into this book now. This is a historical novel set in 1873 England. Mrs. Elizabeth Touchet, a Scottish housekeeper, lives with her cousin through marriage, the novelist William Ainsworth, who is, was a famous novelist, but seems at the time of that the novel takes place to be in decline. Mrs. Touchet actually suspects that her cousin through marriage has very little talent as a writer. Charles Dickens is also featured as well in this novel. Mrs. Touchet becomes fascinated, as do many in England at the time, with the Tichborne trial. Sir Roger Tichborne was believed to have been lost at sea. His mother advertised all over Australia looking for her son, never believing that he was really dead. After the death of the mother, a man shows up in England claiming to be the long-lost Roger Tichborne, who is due to inherit a large fortune and a great title. This man becomes known as the claimant in the trial. There is nothing about him that would suggest that he is, in fact, an aristocrat. It seems obvious that he is a complete fraud, that he is, in fact, an English butcher who had been living in Australia in order to escape his debts. Unbelievably, the obvious fraud manages to become something of a populist hero, developing an incredible following of adoring fans. There is also a star witness, Andrew Bogle, who was raised as a slave on a Jamaican plantation. He claims to have known the claimant in Australia. Mrs. Touchet and Mrs. Ainsworth both watch this trial avidly, and Mrs. Touchet manages to get the star witness to tell his story to her. So there are a lot of different threads going on here. It would seem that while this is a historical novel set in the 19th century with some Dickensian overtones, Zadie Smith has some intention here of addressing, albeit indirectly, our modern times, where a populist base can blindly follow an obvious fraud. So I'll get back to you on this book as my reading of it continues. Next, horror mayhem. Last week, I discussed my impressions of T. Kingfisher's novel, A House with Good Bones, which was recommended to me by MJ at Reading This Life. She thought that this would be a good book for me to read as kind of an entree into the horror genre. She described it as almost cozy horror. I really enjoyed it, and it was the perfect way for me to get into the genre. And after I reviewed it last week, Ollie at Criminale thought that I might like What Moves the Dead, another T. Kingfisher novel. So I did acquire this book, and I've just started to read it. This novel, What Moves the Dead, builds on Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Fall of the House of Usher. As I said, I've just started it, and I am enjoying it so far, and I'm sure that I'll have more to say about it next week in my next wrap-up. Also, for horror mayhem, I reread this week Stephen King's first published novel, CARRIE, which is marking its 50th anniversary this year. I first read this book 50 years ago when it was first published. I did an entire video on my experience of rereading this novel, and I'll include a link to that video down below. I also discussed the novel's long history of being a challenged and banned book, as this novel was my 15th novel read in the Read 24 in 2024 Banned Book Challenge created by my friend MJ at Reading This Life. Next, Mental Health May. I am participating in Mental Health May, hosted by Kim at Middle of the Book March and Marilyn Maya Mendoza. I'm still reading Lori Gottlieb's Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. This is a popular non-fiction book for the lay reader about the therapeutic process. As the writer, a psychotherapist herself, describes not only her patients' lives, but also her own return to therapy after some personal trauma related to a terrible breakup. It's good. At times, it's compelling. It's not great. There's a lot of buzz about this book. There are a lot of really, really positive reviews out there about it. It feels a little too much like pop psychology, at least where I am right now. And maybe that will change. It's not pretending to be an authoritative book on any of the schools of thought of doing therapy, or the approach to the therapeutic process. It's not pretending to be that. It just feels almost a little too colloquial and a little too pop. For my tastes. So the jury is still out for me on this one, but I'm continuing to read it, and I will come back to it when I have come back here to talk about it when I have finished. I have also started for Mental Health May K. Redfield Jamison's newest book, Fires in the Dark, Healing the Unquiet Mind. Dr. Jamison is a professor of psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. She has written widely on bipolar disorder, a disorder that she herself has. Years ago, I read her memoir, An Unquiet Mind, which is about her own experience with bipolar disorder. And it is now considered a major work in the field. I have also read her book, Night Falls Fast, which is a book about suicide. In this new book, Fires in the Dark, in this new book, she writes about the qualities that make a good healer. She focuses in the first part of the book on a few doctors who treated men who were horribly traumatized by the events of World War I. In the second half of the book, she writes about the role of artists, musicians, and writers in the healing process. So I will discuss this book also further in the coming weeks as I continue to read and as we continue to move through Mental Health May. So that's my weekly wrap up for this week. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.